everyone, and mostly probably my future self. So for 2024, I wanted to do a bit of kind of like a video journal of what I read this year. This is just going to be kind of initial impressions of books that I read. Probably, like in this case, I'm doing this the 1st of January, and I read this book just today, so nothing too deep or analytical, just kind of first thoughts and impressions. And after I've sat with a book for a week or two, I might change my mind a lot about it. But today I read Siddhartha by Herman Hesse. Herman Hesse was a German author. He was famous for winning the Nobel Prize and also for being essentially anti-Nazi, and eventually had to flee Germany because of him being against Nazis, and I believe also things like promoting the Jewish writer Franz Kafka was not very popular in his own country based on the political climate at the time. I'm not super educated or familiar with Indian religion and philosophy, but this book felt like a really good kind of primer. One thing that I found out after reading the book and looking up some biographical information is that Herman Hesse, his parents were missionaries to India, and I heard another commentator describe this as almost like a reverse missionary work, because you have Herman Hesse trying to bring the ideas and thoughts of Indian religion and philosophy from the East to the West. And the book's super readable, and it was quite enjoyable. Blended this mythological Eastern religious story with what also felt like almost the archetypical Western hero's journey. Another thing that I really noticed is it felt like there was some weird, almost Christian fusion to some of the thoughts and beliefs. After finishing the book and then looking up some biographical information, it makes a little more sense why I was probably picking up on those vibes, because it sounds like Hesse was very influenced by his Christian background. I don't know if he remained a Christian into adulthood or what he really thought about the Christian religion as an adult, but I think it definitely showcases in Siddhartha where it seems like you almost have this kind of like fusion of East and West in some ways. The book's pretty short, and it's kind of told in a few big scenes, all following the life of the main character, Siddhartha. It starts with Siddhartha as a boy wanting to become a shamana, and apologies right away if I am mispronouncing any of these Indian words. I'm doing my best. Please forgive me if I butcher or mispronounce anything. But wants to join the shamanas, which are essentially, to the best of my knowledge, are like this ascetic, not aesthetic, ascetic cult that lives out in the forest, that live as religious bums that go into town to beg and I think share their wisdom and knowledge with people that will support them. Indian religion, you kind of have this, or like the religious walk, you kind of have this tension between two things, nirvana and samsara. Samsara is kind of just like the vain, banal, worldly things that you're trying to put off to reach this life of enlightenment, which is nirvana. And so these shamanas are trying to essentially reach nirvana. Siddhartha goes with his friend Govinda to this ascetic group, and they join them, and pretty quickly Siddhartha kind of grows disillusioned with them, and eventually they leave this group because they're seeing that nobody is really reaching this magical, mythical state of enlightenment, and they're always searching. They're seeing these old wizened men who seem very noble and wise and well learned, but aren't reaching the end goal. And I think there's the bit of an like suspicion that if our teachers aren't reaching this, then how are we going to reach this? So Govinda and Siddhartha leave the group and go search after Gautama, which I guess is supposed to be the Buddha. I don't know much about Buddhism or anything about that religion. They eventually find them. They find Gautama and his followers, and Govinda joins them, but Siddhartha then leaves his friend because he feels that he needs to go on his own path to find what he's searching for, and eventually comes to a ferryman that becomes important later who helps him across the river to a city. The river is very metaphorical of like the splitting of two sides of life, the kind of like ascetic searching life versus a worldly life of living in a city. Eventually Siddhartha comes to this city, after a while becomes a wealthy merchant, mostly spurred on by the encouragement of someone who seems to be a prostitute that he visits quite regularly. This section of the book has one of the more, I guess, quotable lines that I've ran into before I'd even read the book, which is when Siddhartha shows up to the merchant who eventually takes him on as an apprentice. The merchant asks him what he has to offer. And Siddhartha says to the merchant, he also uses this as like an introduction to the prostitute too, that I can wait, I can think, I can fast. And those are kind of his skills that he took from his ascetic life into this world. And those three tools actually help him go pretty far. Not to diagnose Siddhartha, but he seems a little bit like almost autistic because he's seen everybody else live these lives and he's feeling like this very like gulf of disconnection between them and not really understanding people's emotional connection to the events unfolding before them, and he's feeling almost like a wall between it. And it's almost written in a romantic sort of way where you want to cheer for Siddhartha for feeling kind of above all these banalities of life, and he just kind of looks down on a lot of people and thinks of himself as better. And that's kind of a common theme that comes up over and over again, where it seems like Siddhartha really has this like huge superiority complex, which is kind of vile, really. I know that a lot of young men kind of have this. Maybe the author's just trying to be like accurate to how a lot of young men really are brash, confident, and have this gross superiority complex. But it is written a bit like romantically, where it's almost praised. Though by the end of the book, I think you kind of see that not being the case. But eventually, Siddhartha gets sucked in by all of the worldly things around him and flees his life and considers committing suicide. His friend Govinda meets back up with him again and pretty much saves him. And to make a long section of the book shortened, he then goes to the ferryman and joins the ferryman and becomes a ferryman himself, and finds out that you can listen to the river for wisdom. About at that point, he's reunited with the woman Kamala for a short period of time and finds out that she became pregnant with his son as he was fleeing his old life, and he now has a son who is, I think, 11 at this point in time. Siddhartha tries to essentially smother his son with love to convince him to live with him and also be a ferryman, and his son eventually runs away and rebels against that, and Siddhartha kind of realizes that things have come full circle, and his son treated him the same way that he treated his father when he ran away. Eventually, he meets back again with Govinda, his old friend. They're both old men at this point. Govinda's a little bit sad because the fate that they were kind of worried about. The Shamana had kind of fallen Govinda, where he never really reached enlightenment and is still seeking. Siddhartha essentially shares all of his wisdom that he's gathered with Govinda, in what kind of feels like I guess like a pantheistic sort of ending, where everything is everything, and I I kind of, I guess, really, like, just because I'm not like a huge like pantheistic person, I kind of was a little bit, maybe I scoffed a bit at the ending, perhaps. It was very like reincarnation focused, where, this rock is also the soil, which is also the human, which is also the Buddha, etc., etc. I think that's where it kind of lost me a bit. Myself being a Christian, I don't believe in this form of pantheism, and so it was still a beautifully done ending, and really tied the whole story together. I think I found lots of like useful like nuggets of wisdom throughout the book, and things that I agreed and disagreed with, but the ending kind of conclusion, I think, was mo- mostly really just not for me, based on my own personal beliefs. Glad to be at least slightly more educated on Indian philosophy, religion, and thought, at least from the eyes of a German Westerner that spent some time there. I definitely think if you have any sort of passing interest in Indian religion, then this is probably a really fun stepping point or stepping stone to kind of dip your toes in the water and see what you think. And if you find it compelling and interesting, then you probably have a lot to go off of after that. I know I've recently purchased a set of, I think from Penguin Classics, of the Mahabharata. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but it's like 10 volumes. It takes up like a whole shelf of books. So I'll probably try and dig into some of that this year too. So signing off for now. Happy New Year, everybody, and I hope to talk to you again soon about some good books that I've read.